Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, everyone. This is the Microsoft 365 Platform Community Call for November 16th. I am Brian T. Jackett, your host. Today, we've got some great topics we'll be covering. In terms of our agenda today, we'll cover a little bit of the latest updates and news on the Microsoft 365 platform. We will once again do our picture time. So we appreciate everyone joining in live to be able to join into our picture time. Great to see that working again. And then we got some great demos that will be coming up today. First from Loki, talking about using adaptive cards inside of Microsoft Teams tabs. And then also Waldeck and Vesta will join us to be talking about extending adaptive card extensions inside of Viva Connections. And then if there's time at the end, we'll open things up for Q&A, but this will be our agenda for today. Now, in terms of being able to get access to resource, there are a lot of different locations that you can go into. The first things in terms of videos, we have two different areas for both the developers as well as our community. You can go to aka.ms/m365dev YouTube. For our developer videos, lots of great content related to Microsoft 365 development, no matter where you're at, what you're building, great content for you to see, tutorials and getting started, lots of other information like that. We also have our community videos at aka.ms/m365pmp/videos. All of our community calls and other types of referential material, you can find the recordings out there in our community videos. Also, we are an open source platform. We love to get your feedback, your participation, your pull requests, other areas to join in from the Microsoft 365 developer platform. You can find a number of links on here for GitHub references. Also, samples, if you want to be able to get started and see what actually can I do with these different platforms, what can I be able to extend and kind of make my little mark into areas. We've got a lot of different samples available to you, whether you're building with Teams, with SharePoint Framework, with other areas of Power Platform and so forth. So feel free to take a look at those samples. But as always, if you want to get the one-stop shop for all of the different areas in terms of the community call schedules, the sample links, and so forth, feel free to take a look at aka.ms/m365pmp, your one URL for all the different resources that you may need. Now, if you are looking to get started and you don't have an area where you can actually go and develop against, we do offer our Microsoft 365 developer program, a great way to essentially get a set of E5 developer licenses directly in your own sandbox tenant. You can find this at aka.ms/m365/dev program. And now we even offer this with instant availability, a great way to be able to spin up that tenant, be able to go and develop your different applications or different customizations in the privacy and in isolation in your own dev tenant. So feel free to take a look at that. Please do sign up and join in. Also, if you're looking for ways to learn more about the Microsoft 365 platform, we've got a number of different courses and training materials and modules and so forth at aka.ms/m365/dev/learn. Great ways to be able to plug in and find out what is new, what's the latest and greatest. These are constantly evolving and updating different training materials. Now we even have information in here about Viva Connections. So great way to plug in there and be able to get up and started. As I mentioned previously, our samples gallery has now over 600 samples out there from both Microsoft folks as well as the community. So we really appreciate everyone who pitches in to go and be able to build out more for this. You can find this at aka.ms/m365/samples. And as a little Easter egg, I even snuck in a little adaptive card sample into our screenshot on here. So who doesn't love internet cats and memes and so forth? A great way to be able to see some samples for adaptive cards and other areas as well. So feel free to take a look at those samples out there. And be able to get involved in the actual PMP community, I'll turn things over to David for talking about our Sharing is Caring initiative.
Thanks, Brian. And friends, as you know, Sharing is Caring is here to provide you some assistance in getting more involved in the community. Now, this may mean that you want to utilize the resources that are available to you, some of all the amazing samples that we have, the adaptive card extension samples and SPFX samples. It may be that you want to contribute back, but there are always some hurdles, such as how do I process and submit a GitHub pull request? How do I get on some of the community calls to provide demos of my work that I've done? These are hands-on, inclusive, safe space opportunities that we're going to walk you through how to accomplish and take advantage of all of these resources. They are scheduled monthly. We've got a little lighter schedule coming up for the rest of the year just to take into account vacations and holidays, but we have some ever popular sessions. One of our newest Power Platform samples, we have those both months coming up this month and next month, showing you some amazing tips and tricks how you can submit your Power Platform samples to the gallery. As always, we've got our ever popular AMAs that are coming up. One scheduled today. It's a little later in the day, 11 a.m. Pacific time, but there will be the Join Teams link available to you directly at the Sharing is Caring site. So go hit that smash Join Teams button, and we'd love to see you collaborate with the community. Patrick Rogers and Julie Turner will be there as our guests of honor. aka.ms/sharing is caring. Brian, back to you.
Thank you, David. And I appreciate our community saying you have a radio person's announcer voice. So yes, I would wholeheartedly agree with that. All right, if you'd like to join in terms of other areas to follow along with what's the latest and greatest, we've got a couple different podcasts and other ways to plug in. First is our Microsoft 365 Developer Podcast by our very own Jeremy Thake and Paul Schaeflein. Great way to get some interviews and insights into what's the latest and greatest with the Microsoft 365 Developer Platform. So feel free to tune into that at m365devpodcast.com. We also have our PMP Weekly, which is a great way to get into the announcements, various different interviews and updates related to the platform. So a great way to see both Microsoft folks as well as community members be able to provide into this. You can find the links on the page, aka.ms/PMP Weekly for the videos, as well as the podcast at pnpweekly.podbean.com. Now, in terms of the news available for our developer platform, got a couple of different items that are on here. The first one is that we do have a breaking change coming to the online meetings API. This is only for the beta, but we do want to make sure that all of our developers are kept up to date on the latest for this. In the case here, we've introduced a attendance records, essentially a new resource. We're actually changing a little bit in terms of the property for this. Rather than it being a complex type, it is now actually a navigation property. So there's more information that you can actually go and find out on there if you'd like to take a look and see on our blog for this. We're also announcing a new preview of the Teams JavaScript SDK, now supporting additional targets for this. If you're looking for Office.com, for Outlook, and some other areas, great way to extend to other canvases beyond just simply the Teams platform. So please feel free to take a look at this in terms of what's the newest with this preview and see what you can do to build that out. And then lastly, we do have another blog post, again, from Vesa, some great information related to how can we actually go and work with adaptive card extensions. There's great information and videos on here in terms of working with secure APIs, being able to work with multi-tenant applications. So a great way to understand what might be required from this, from just kind of getting started, and then be able to actually develop that into your application. So please feel free to take a look at these blog posts. Stay tuned to all the various different resources that we publish. Want to make sure that you are as informed, as engaged as possible when working with the platform. And this time, we'll turn things over to do our online picture time. So feel free to turn on your video cameras. Vesa, if you want to take over and do the gallery view, you could get all of our wonderful smiling, waving faces into our lovely pictures.
Absolutely. 1 second. So let me share my screen so we can start the Camtasia. I can see we're hitting the 50 limit pretty soon. You can still, I think, we still might have 1 or 2 seats on the house. We are, I think, we're fully booked. So let's do some hand waving, everybody. Thanks everybody for joining once again on the weekly community call. Awesome to see this many people in the house. Thank you, thank you, thank you. Brilliant, really good job. And we'll take a GIF animation out of that one as well. Thank you for that.
Excellent. Thank you so much, everyone. We will jump back to our presentation. There we go. Yep. I love that feature, being able to jump right back into the slide that we were at. Saves me a whole bunch of scrolling and clicking. All right, with that, it is time to move into our demo portion. Again, today we have Loki talking about building adaptive cards into Teams tabs, as well as Waldeck and Vesa will be rounding up things with the working with Viva Connections. With that, we'll turn things over to Loki. Feel free to take the floor, and it is yours.
Cool. Thanks, Brian. Give me 1 second. I'm going to share my screen. I'm also going to turn off my video camera, save on bandwidth for you folks. So turn that off and share my screen. All right. Hey, folks. My name is Loki Mayberg. I am a PM on the Teams platform team. I'm excited to talk to you today about building tabs with adaptive cards. Time permitting, I'll also be taking some questions at the end of the presentation. Before we jump into the feature, I want to just quickly go over some of the problems we're trying to solve. So some developers say building a tab or a Teams tab can be quite tricky. Oftentimes the tab doesn't look and feel native to the rest of Teams. Also, some web apps aren't responsive, and therefore they don't work easily on mobile. We also frequently hear about slow load times. Sometimes this is because of the fact that it's embedded in an iframe, but that could also open up a host of other constraints depending on how the web app is built. Finally, there are usually a host of other hidden maintenance costs. This is because some developers actually have a fork of their primary web app running in Teams, but other issues tend to crop up too, such as making accessibility work or just trying to figure out Azure Active Directory single sign-on. Now, building with adaptive cards, on the other hand, would allow you to build your app with ready-made UI building blocks, They look and feel native on desktop, web, and mobile. For those of you that aren't familiar with adaptive cards, they're usually attached as these rich, interactive UI snippets in a message body, often sent either by a user or a bot, kind of like these examples here. Another benefit of using adaptive cards is that teams and the adaptive card team are investing heavily in their future. So take, for example, some of these new or coming soon UI features. This past year, we've launched support for form validation and the ability to use a people picker. Coming soon, we'll also be releasing an overflow menu, which will make it easier for you to create drop-down actions in adaptive cards. There have been many improvements made over the last year, too many to cover in this call. Regardless, snapping to adaptive cards should give you peace of mind that you'll be rewarded over time with more and more UI features. When I say you can build adaptive cards with ready-made UI building blocks, this is what I mean. If you go to the Adaptive Cards website, you will find something called the Designer. This is where you can drag and drop and edit your UI elements in real time. You can also preview what they will look like in many different surface areas. So later on, I'm going to show you how I use it in my workflow when I get to the demo section. Now that we've got that out of the way, on to the good stuff. Let's talk about adaptive card-based tabs. Here you see a sample app built with adaptive card-based tabs. You'll notice that this is a Teams personal app with 3 tabs: Home, More, and Chat. Under the Home tab, you'll see 3 adaptive cards stacked one on top of another. So this is a great way to show your most used adaptive cards to your users, and also provides a much nicer way to interact with your app rather than via the bot chat. On the right, you'll see what it looks like on mobile. And overall, you'll notice that it just looks a lot more native. This is because adaptive cards are styled to look right at home in Teams. So before we jump into the demo, I just want to spend a few minutes talking about some of the architectural decisions we made along the way and the developer experience. So this is how most Teams apps start. The developer builds a bot because that's the easiest way to get started. And with that bot, they're able to power a number of Teams capabilities, such as chatbots, messaging extensions, or even show dialogues called task modules. This is all powered by a bot backend and an adaptive card front end. A few months later, along comes their manager, and they ask them to build a tab because they've heard that tabs get better engagement and they like how they look. Okay, so let's look at what that looks like. Now the app's architecture is fractured. The developer had to spin up a separate web server to host their tab app, and they had to build the front end using, the usual set of web tools. Perhaps they wrote some glue code so that their backends can talk to one another. At the end of the day, not only could you not reuse your previous investments, but you're now on the hook for maintaining 2 different stacks. So wouldn't it be easier if you could do something like this? I think that looks much better. So what if you could power everything in Teams with a single bot backend and an adaptive card front end? So this is the unified developer experience that adaptive card-based tabs aims to solve. Now you can reuse your previous investments and enable everything from a chatbot to a Teams tab. Let's talk quickly about just some of the developer paradigms that you can expect. So adaptive card-based tabs should be a welcome new capability for bot developers. When we were thinking about how we wanted to structure the developer experience, we looked at task modules for inspiration, and we did this for 2 reasons. First, task modules, they're going to be used quite heavily from your tab. So this will just make the development experience more familiar. And then secondly, task modules rely on something called invoke events. An example invoke event is task fetch. So you can extrapolate task fetch to other events like tab fetch. The hope here is that this will make the back and forth or the request and response payloads much easier to understand. So let's take a look at some of those invoke events. So here are some common task module invoke events: task fetch and task submit. If you were to build adaptive card-based tabs, you will be using events called tab fetch and tab submit instead. So let's take a look at the flow diagram. In the first section, the user clicks on the app and Teams sends a tab fetch event to the bot. The event basically says, "Hey bot, I'm the home tab, and the user is John Smith. Can you please return the cards you want me to show to them?" The bot backend then does some work and returns an array of adaptive cards. These cards are then rendered to the screen one after the other in the tab itself. If you've ever built task module dialogues, it should look very similar. So instead of returning one card to show in a dialog, you'll just be returning multiple cards to show in a tab. So onto the demo. Let's see. Before I jump in to the actual code, just some housekeeping. How did I get here? So to start with, I set up a bot in Azure, and I just want to spend a few seconds talking about the configuration panel over here. You'll notice I'm running this on ngrok just for local development. And I'll get back to this Microsoft App ID. I want to jump into the OAuth section real quick. I had to set up OAuth. Here you see the same Microsoft App ID. Here it's called the client ID. Think of this as your bot ID. They're one and the same. The next thing is I left tenant ID blank because I want this to work in any tenant. And then finally, I just defined some graph scopes that I want to get permission for. So set up a little bot in Azure. The next thing that I did is I went over to the build tabs with adaptive cards documentation. And if I scroll all the way to the very bottom, here you can see some code samples. For today, I'm just using the Node.js code sample, and that's going to be this one over here. And if you scroll all the way down the little README file, you're going to have all the little setup instructions that I did before this call just to get everything set up. Okay, so into the code itself. The first change you're going to notice is we now allow you to have a property called content bot ID under your static tabs property. We still have a property called content URL. That renders a URL to the tab, but now we allow you to put a content bot ID. That's that Microsoft, app ID or client ID that I was just showing you in Azure earlier. And basically what this says is when I go to this home tab, instead of rendering a URL, send a message to this little bot over here. So I'm going to jump into that real quick. I have the app running. This is just what the sample looks like out of the box when you get it up and running. Not pretty, but it's really here for illustration and for instruction purposes. So next thing I want to do is I'm going to go back into my project. Let me just stop my little server here. I'm going to go over to the file called adaptive cards. You'll notice it's under the server models folder. In here is a bunch of methods you can find, but I'm really going to be looking at the create fetch response. This basically returns a response to the bot. Over here, you'll see two cards. That is these two cards. So I want to return a third card. So let's go do that right now. Get demo card, I suppose. And we're not going to take any properties on this one. Let's do this, get demo card, empty. So in here, let's just create a response object. Let's just leave it empty for now, and let's return that. Okay. So if you recall, that's this one up here. We want to return this little adaptive card over here. So what I did before this call is I went into the adaptive cards designer, and I went and I created this little card over here. Down over here is the JSON for that card. I'm just going to copy this and go back into VS Code, and I'm just going to throw this in here, save it, boot this one back up, give it a few seconds. There we go. Okay, back over here. And voila, there you go. This is my little adaptive card that I'm returning. So in this case, what I went and did was I went and I said I wanted to add a new adaptive card on the top of this vertically stacked list. So just want to dig into it a little bit more into this demo. There's already some descriptive text over here to let you know how you can do some things inside of the demo. I want to just go through task modules. Task modules are a great way to complete, as the name says, little tasks. So for example, this little demo doesn't do anything, but one of the things that it allows me to do is after I've completed a task, I can redraw what's behind here. Now in this demo, it's pretty contrived. It's just going to return one adaptive card, one little card, just with a little bit of some information about what happened behind the scenes. But if I wanted to, in this example, I have favorites. I could have a button that says add favorite, open up a little dialog, choose who my new favorite person is, click done, and then have this little section be updated here with my 4th favorite contact. So moving on from that, I want to jump back in here. I want to just talk about some of the nuances with respect to how you handle task module dialogues from your tab. So the good news is that there's no change to invoking a task module. But something to keep in mind is that when the task module completes or task submit, you will be returning a set of adaptive cards to re-render to the screen. So in order to do this, you will be nesting your tab object inside a task object. This is kind of done for syntactical reasons because the original request was a task fetch. The bot framework expects a response parent object to be of type task. Just something to keep in mind. Alternatively, you could just return 200 OK, close a dialog, and not redraw anything to the tab. Finally, there are some drawbacks or shortcomings, if you will, that I want to point out. You may have noticed that I only showed personal app tabs. That's because we don't yet support the adaptive card-based tabs in group settings, such as chats, channels, or meetings. Secondly, I hear this one a lot. We don't have rich layout controls. For now, we'll be sticking with a vertically stacked list of cards. This is fine on mobile, but it may make your desktop experience seem quite spacious. Finally, the developer experience can kind of feel a little reminiscent of the request response flow of web apps circa 2005. There's basically no way to asynchronously update the contents of a tab. Don't worry, we're thinking through all of these. Think of these perhaps less like drawbacks and more like a roadmap of what's to come. Thanks everyone for sticking with me until the end. Here is a short link to the documentation and where you can find the sample app I showed you during the demo. Just visit aka.ms/adaptivecard-tabs. Thank you, thank you, thank you. Time permitting, let's see if there are any questions.
We do have a couple of questions in the chat. I'll try and grab some of the highlight ones in here at least.
Okay.
What you were showing today, does this require any kind of admin or global rights permissions? This comes from Craig.
No, not that I'm aware of. No.
Okay.
Well, I mean, the usual ones, like your admin might need you to be able to, sideload applications for development purposes. But if you spin up one of the M365 developer tenants and set that up for Teams development, you should be able to get going out of the box. There's no special restrictions that I'm aware of.
Gotcha. Thank you. Stephen had asked much earlier up on Teams. Has Teams increased the size of the limit for adaptive cards? Previously, it was 28 kilobytes. Is that still the case? Do you know?
That is a really good question. We are playing around with the numbers. I don't remember what it is, if it's 100 kilobytes or 200 kilobytes, but it is larger for adaptive card-based tabs. So you can return a much greater response for these types of experiences.
Gotcha. Can you specify which version of adaptive cards this is running at? I know that there's like 1 through 1.4, but if you have any information on that, it's coming from Mark.
That is a good question. I'm trying to think through what Teams supports. I think it's 1.3, maybe 1.4.
1.3 is the current, if I'm not mistaken.
I do want to be careful and say it's the current one because there are some changes in 1.5 that I don't think that these support. Maybe a better way of saying it supports current, but just maybe not all of the features yet in the most current version. What's that feature called where you can reload adaptive cards while they're into the Teams client? We don't support that yet inside of adaptive card-based tabs.
Gotcha. Do you happen to know if there is support for a SharePoint web part that can display adaptive cards? Coming from Mike Dixon.
That is a good question. So this is SharePoint agnostic. I know this is a SharePoint audience predominantly, but Vesa, I think I've seen the ability in SPFX to show adaptive cards in a component. Is that correct, or am I misremembering?
Yeah, it's a bit of complex. This is not, by the way, SharePoint audience. This is the Microsoft 365 platform community call, not a SharePoint audience for sure. But now there are ways of showing adaptive cards and using adaptive cards in the Viva Connections, which is a bit of a kind of a, well, behind of the scenes, it's SharePoint still. So there's ways of doing this, but it's not natively as such in a web part experience in SharePoint Online.
Okay, got it. Thanks, Besa.
Okay, I think one last question we might have time for on here is there support for tabs within the adaptive cards themselves? Coming from Jim Duncan.
Sorry, could you repeat that?
Is it possible to display tabs within the adaptive card itself?
Yes, with some work. I have seen some wizardry from the adaptive cards team themselves. They have been able to create some really awesome components. I'm sure if you went snooping on GitHub or you found some of the GitHub projects from some of the adaptive cards teams, you will most certainly find the ability for there to be tabs. I've seen it. I just know that it's not something that's like natively supported out of the box. You have to do some adaptive card wizardry to make that work. However, I will say that I have seen demos, or I'd rather say prototypes, that some of our other partners have built as they were kicking the tires, and they built tab-like interfaces. So, for example, we had one of our SPFX partners build a prototype where they had a list up at the top of, there were buttons, but they kind of behaved more like tabs, where you could switch between different catalogs. They built like a little shopping app, so you could flip between shoes and tennis rackets and go to your shopping cart. And they were able to facilitate that kind of tab-like interface with these adaptive card-based tabs.
Excellent. And one last question, if we can sneak it in here. Is there any consideration for how adaptive cards will be interacting with Loop components, which was just recently announced at Ignite, either in terms of displaying adaptive cards through Loop or vice versa?
That is most certainly a great idea and something I will have to look into, but it is far too early for me to be able to say one way or the other, if that makes sense. However, I will say that the Loop looks really cool, and we're excited to be bringing more of that into the Teams experience.
Excellent. Well, really, really appreciate you coming on today, Loki, to share more about this, to demo this, sharing lots of resources and other things for us to be able to dive into and get started with this.
Of course. Thanks for having me, Brian and Besa.
Thanks so much.
Thank you, Loki. Really good stuff.
Vesa Waldeck, we'll turn things over to you to talk about our next topic.
Yes.
Thank you.
Thank you. Waldeck, you're going to keep your video on, right? I'm not going to enable the video to make sure that the upstream is working properly from my side, but you can see the screen, right?
Yes.
So you'll talk, I'll click. No, just the...
Perfect. Move your mouse to the left, not to the other left.
Exactly. Now, so me and Waldeck, we are back. We have this series of 3 different modules as we are going through the Viva Connections extensibility model. And in the Viva Connection, we have 3 different extensibility options. We're going to talk about them in soon. But today is not about adaptive cards, actually, because that was a week ago. That recording is available, and there will be an individual video on that one relatively soon in the YouTube channel as well. So today we're going to talk about the Viva Connection and the web part. And how do you actually modify the Viva Connection desktop? But before we go there, let's talk about the situation as a whole for those who are not up to date what's happening here. So first of all, we're going to talk about the Viva Connection extensibility. So if you go AKMS M365 dev-learn, you can find the extend Microsoft Viva Connection, really good learning path. Waldeck did an awesome job of creating this learning path. And it's 1.5 hours, and you understand basically what are the different options of doing extensibility in Viva Connections. And really good exercises, simple to do, simple to follow. And then you master Viva Connection extensibility right after that. Right, Waldeck?
Exactly.
Yes, it's enough to put it in your CV. I know Viva Connection. Right. Now, but today we're going to talk about the Viva Connection and how do we extend the Viva Connection with web parts and what does that mean? So we're going to do a live demo here. For those who are super familiar with SharePoint Framework, this looks pretty much the same and interesting, so you might be familiar with this. SharePoint Framework in general, and there is an ongoing discussion. We talked about this one in the past as well. There's an ongoing discussions of renaming SharePoint Framework because it is much more than just SharePoint. And in certain, let's say, scenes and certain group of people, SharePoint has a relatively negative tone on its name. So we want to there's a leadership level decision of starting to rename SharePoint Framework to something else, because you can use it also for Microsoft Teams and for Viva Connection, and in future for other areas as well, so which we cannot talk about yet. But today we're going to talk about how do we build a custom web part and how do we extend Microsoft Viva Connection using that, so you will be familiar with that. Now, just to recap the situation, Viva Connection Toolkit is generally available. Viva Connection is generally available as well. I'm going to show in practice today what does it mean, how do you set it up in briefly, so you're up to date on how to move forward with this. But basically, as said, we're using SharePoint Framework 1.13 as the tooling and the toolkit to create Viva Connection Extensibility. In this case, again, we're going to create a web part, which is for extending the desktop and the experiences. So that's not available in the mobile experiences. We're going to talk about those things in the upcoming slides as well. Just to recap again on the Viva Connection extensibility options, there are 3 different extensibility options which are going through within this learning path as well. So you can create web parts, and web parts are basically, they are configurable by the editors who are designing the Viva Connection desktop experience, so they can modify the properties and how the behavior is being done. There's the application customizers, which are being exposed in every single page in the Viva Connection. So you can use them to embed, for example, headers and footers in the page. And then there's the adaptive card extensions, which is mainly for the mobile experience, but they do have actually desktop experience as well. I'm going to see that in a bit as well. But it's basically the mobile Viva Connection mobile experience. That's when we use adaptive cards. And again, just to recap, today we're going to focus on web parts. Not adaptive card extensions, we focused on that one last week, and next week we're going to focus on application customizers, and then we're going to move to another learning path in a completely different topics. But we want to actually go through this awesome material for everybody to benefit as well. I can, by the way, see questions as they come on the chat, so I will try to follow up on them if there's any, and Waldek is going to jump on things as needed as well. Right, Waldek?
Definitely. Absolutely.
Yes, and
still here.
You're going to help me to do some coding today. So let's see how this
goes.
Totally. As a principal program manager, you're not expected to write any code anymore. So now, learning objective of today, we're going to talk about a bit on the development tooling, how to get started on that. You might be super familiar on that already. And we're going to talk about how do we extend Microsoft Viva Connection with web parts and deploy the test custom web parts in Microsoft Viva Connection. So how do we actually deploy those to be available, just to understand the basics, how this is actually being done. If you are coming from if you build stuff for modern SharePoint Online, you might be familiar with these things already, but again, it's the same familiar extensibility model, which is available for Viva Connection in certain level. And I need to point out that the guy in the second row is doubtful, so he's clearly not convinced. So I don't think we actually have the slide where he is convinced in the end, but let's see. Now, as we have then enabled the Viva Connection, and then we want to have the end users or the editors to be able to, for example, surface internal data from internal systems to the employees directly in the Viva Connection desktop, or we want to surface or aggregate information, or we want to, let's say, inform people using our custom logic. That's when we are going to build a reusable widget, which is going to show, in this case, a company announcements, which the content editors can, the web part is going to show company announcements, which the content editors and page editors can then put it on the page. In our case, we're going to put it on the Viva desktop welcome page, and we're going to talk about what is basically the experience there and how do you modify the Viva Connection experiences as well. Now, how do we get started? We're not going to do all of this. I'm going to walk this through as we're waiting for Yeoman Generator to walk through. So I'm going to show you my setup so you're up to date on what's happening here. But basically what we need to do is enable the Viva connection. There is a really good documentation how to do this, actually in the learning path as well. So the learning path actually goes through all of the needed steps. The only a bit challenge there, just a word of a warning, is that as you go through and enable the Viva connection and a home site in your tenant, and then surfacing that eventually in Microsoft Teams through the Viva connection, there are caching situations and there are some timelines. So there are server-side things which we need to get executed. So every now and then there might be a 30-minute delay for something to actually enable. And it's a bit frustrating, so to say, but it's a one-time configuration per tenant. So that's why it's not something what we, for now at least, have designed to be immediate, because again, making it immediate as a one-time configuration in a tenant wasn't a justified cost. So, and then we're going to install SharePoint Framework Yeoman Generator. We're going to talk about that one in a bit as well. And then I'm going to show you the SharePoint list of sample data, which we already have available for testing. So we're not going to spend too much time on there. And then today's point was about extending connection, Viva connection with the web parts. And that's when we basically design, the web parts are the components of web widgets in this page and then welcome page in the desktop, which are exposing information. And the key point here is that you have full flexibility on designing whatever kind of experience you want. So you can add any web parts, you can add additional web parts, and it's all flexible for you to design. We as a Microsoft, we don't lock down this experience. So if you're a partner, you can basically design different set of offerings on top of the Viva connection with different set of web parts and experiences. And that's one way of approaching how do we do these things, which is really, really cool. Web parts can have content editors. You can configure that. You can modify that. You can modify the web part properties. And on the right side, web part always have customizable properties. Well, not necessarily that, but they can have customizable properties. In our case, for example, today we're gonna lock down the information. You own the HTML and CSS of the web part, this web widget, so you can do whatever you want inside of that Chrome, inside of the HTML structure. And
including using adaptive cards to render UI.
Including using adaptive cards. You can actually do that as well. That is true. Yes. And of course, it's a good idea to build a responsive UI in mind just to avoid any surprises over there. And also the web parts, including in the Viva connection or in a SharePoint Online, they can be connected between each other. So you can build this connected experiences, which is really, really cool as well. Now, as a rule of thumb, we recommend on building web parts if you need an extended Viva Connection desktop experience and you want to let content editors decide what do you want to put on a page. So you basically have this then configurable option to add on a page or remove from a page and all of that. So that's kind of the rule of thumb for when the web part is the right option. And let's actually jump into the writing of the code. So first of all, I'm going to actually create the solution, and we're going to use SharePoint Framework 1.13. It's already installed, so I can. So now, if I do npm, if I can write, there we go. Having a keyboard without. No, that's not correct.
npm ls.
Oh.
Or
yes,
list.
I'm missing the list. Yeah. 1 second. Where's my mouse?
Just helping.
Okay, here we go. Not there. Not. That's a good point. So there we go. So we're listing basically what has been installed in my computer. Currently, I'm just going to pinpoint the right solution which have been installed whenever the npm is. Oh, I have a typo.
Yeah,
there.
you need single equals.
There we go. Thank you. Thank you. That's why you are helping me on making this happen.
Yes.
So basically in here, we have the Microsoft Generator SharePoint installed as a 1.13 version. That's what we need to install from npm. And if you're not familiar with all of this stuff, sounds weird maybe, but it's basically how web stack development works. You write in TypeScript, you install stuff from npm or yarn, and typical web development, no SharePoint isms or Viva connection isms needed, so to say. And what we're going to do here is that we're going to run the Microsoft SharePoint Yeoman Generator. And I'm going to follow up on the guidance what we have, which we provided in as a documentation. And I'm going to copy just the information. It's not really writing code as I'm copying the information directly from the exercise, but still. We're going to target SharePoint Online. By the way, this question is going to go away in 1.14 as it actually is being mentioned there. We're going to use the current folder, and we're going to say no for these particular questions, following up on the guidance, and we're going to create a web part in this case. We're going to call it a company announcement. And as it shows company announcements, so the descriptions are visible as the end user is selecting the web part, and it is using no JavaScript framework. And that starts now the solution creation. As we're doing that, let me show you what we have available in our test environment. So first of all, we already have our homepage or a home site set up in the tenant. It could be the root of the tenant, or it could be any URL in the tenant. So in this case, we just created a home site collection and set that to be the home site. Then after that, what we've done is that we enable the global navigation that gives you some additional functionalities, for example, in here. After that, what we've done is that we actually installed the Viva Connection application. And the cool thing about Viva Connection application is that you can personalize that. Like in our case, even though we install Viva Connection application to be available in a tenant, we can change the name to be the company name. So Contoso is the imaginary name of this company where we are working right now. Waldek is the CTO, Chief Technical Officer of Contoso. Now, then we enabled that solution to be available based on the company policy settings. And this is basically making sure that whenever somebody accesses Microsoft Teams, they have a certain set of solutions available in the Teams left navigation. It is a really nice way of defining a consistent experience across the company. You can, by the way, create multiple policies. So you can have multiple, you can have a default organization-wide, and then you can have another one for engineers, another one for consulting, another one for sales, and all of that stuff, which is really, really cool as well. Now, as we have then done that one, that means that if I go to Microsoft Teams, and I'm going to use the web client in this case, just a easier way to differentiate the profile from my personal profile, we can see that the Contoso application is available in here, and this is the Viva Connection. So we basically are surfacing our home site in here, and if I click, for example, in here, we can see the latest news and all of that information, global navigation available directly within the Microsoft Teams. So we are in the context of the work. We don't have to move anywhere else from here, and that's really the objective, what we want to do with Viva Connection as well. By the way, just a note, if you're looking into doing a cool demos, you can really easily use the lookbook.microsoft.com, which we didn't use in this case. And for example, use the perspective or one of these designs and then enable the Viva Connection in them. So that way you get a really nice experience and a cool looking site and example content and all of that available for demo purposes. Good, I got a thumbs up from Waldek. That's always a good sign. So let me now go to the actual code. So the scaffolding has ended. We created a SharePoint framework solution. I'm going to a bit increase the font and sizing here so you can see what I'm doing. It is a SharePoint framework solution. We're not going to deep dive exactly what does that mean. If you're familiar with that, then it's okay. And we're going to actually go to the solution code. Now I need to go and double check that I'm doing this properly from the code. And first of all, what we want to do and what is our objective is that we want to actually create a web part which is surfacing these announcements which the end users can actually create in the root site. So it's a simple scenario in this case. So a content editor can create announcements, which can be also important, and we're going to render those as part of this web part. So relatively simple thing, but it really shows the power of using, again, TypeScript and the flexibility what we have using the web stack tooling as well. So let's go back in here. We have a baseline structure available. What I'm going to do here is that I'm going to add an SP HTTP reference. So this is an easiest package and library to use to access information in SharePoint. It's going to do all of the access token handling, that classic challenge that where do I get the token? You just hit the API with the token. Where do I get the token? Well, luckily this fellow is taking care of all of that for you. So it's a really seamless single sign-on accessing to APIs. And then what we're going to do is that we're going to update the render method. So in this case, there's the render method. I'm going to get rid of the example default, and I'm going to update that a bit. I'm going to indent that a bit because otherwise that's getting annoying. I can't help it. If the indentation is not correct, it hurts eyes. So actually close that. So having a look on here, what we're doing quickly, we're hitting a API, SharePoint, in this case, SharePoint REST API. Of course, you can absolutely and should be using Microsoft Graph APIs as well for getting some of the information. It really depends, again, what kind of information you're surfacing. Graph is absolutely brilliant. In this case, we're just using the simple REST APIs from SharePoint. From the announcement list, we are getting title, description, and important. That's our objective. And then there are the display results selection. That's what's happening here. So I'm going to actually then take the display results. I'm going to paste in the needed code in there and the intention, well, it's there. But basically what's happening here is that we are getting those individual announcements and we're rendering them in the right format, depending on is the important set or not. So there's going to be a bit different rendering on the styles perspective if the announcement is important or not. And I'm going to save the changes. That's the one thing what I always keep on forgetting. Control S, Control S, Control S. So you compile the code and then you don't change the changes and you're wondering what is wrong, and then you've got about saving. Now let's then actually, good point by the way, Waldek, you are saving. You're even saying in the guidance that remember to save. So that's really good reminder.
Exactly.
Documentation. So
read the manual. Just read the manual.
That's true. Now, the one thing what we also want to do here is that we're using styles. Like here we can see styles.important, styles.company announcement, styles.container. So we need to make sure that for our web part and the experience, we have the right style. So what I'm going to do is that I'm going to replace the existing style file, which is based on the default structure, with this structure from the code, which is then having the needed definitions like the important and DD and DD. So we're rendering the information in the right way as an output. So relatively simple stuff, again, defining the fonts and all of that stuff in here, and that's ready to go. Now, I'm going to go then back. And first of all, Control S, we are saved. We can see that there's no pending changes. I'm going to go back in the command line. I'm going to do gulp serve no browser. And this basically means that I'm running the local host web service, and I want to test out this web part in my tenant. So we want to check it out, that is it actually working? Is the code working? We would be able to do debugging as well, optionally, and we're going to skip that today from a timing perspective. But this is really to make sure that we are serving the code still from localhost and double checking that everything is working fine. So let me go in here. Let me go to the home of the site. And we kind of use the online workbench. Online workbench, if you're familiar with this, there's nothing new in here, but you basically go to a _layouts 15 workbench.aspx, a bit of a complex thing. If you're not familiar with this stuff, how would I know that it's there? And maybe we should have a easier way to get there from a developer perspective. But again, future improvements. In here, as I'm running the local workbench, SharePoint Online is smart enough to understand, hey, you actually have things available from your local workbench, and we can see the important announcement web part to be available, and it shows important announcement.
This is the ACE, actually. You want to move down.
It is actually that you're 100% correct.
Local one.
You are 100% correct. That's the ACE.
Up, it was right there up. Right there. If you go all the way up. If you go all the way up, second row, all the way up.
Yeah, here we go, because we didn't compile that. You're 100% correct. Now, the reason why this is a bit confusing is that I'm using the same tenant which we tried, the ACE and adaptive card last week. So that's that one. This is not the web part which we just created. We created a web part, and we created a web part which is running from local, which is actually pretty nice that it's actually telling me that it's running from local host. It's not running in the tenant. And I can select the company announcement. And then there's our company announcement. Woohoo! It's actually working. So this means that we basically copied the code. I was able to copy the code which Waldek provided for me in a correct way. Woohoo! I can actually do that.
It's working.
It's working. And that information which we're basically saying here, just to recap that one, is coming from the announcement list that was in the code as well. So we were accessing the announcement list, basically showing complete mandatory training, and that's important, and holiday season company announcement. And then that was the text. If I go back in here, we can see that the information is matching or from that list. That's really cool. That was super easy. That wasn't hard at all. At least when you're following up on the tutorial, right? So
read the manual. Read the manual.
And then you learn. That's always the thing. You learn by doing. That's always true. So for sure. So I'm going to close up the debugger. So just closing on that one. And then as we already confirmed that our absolutely awesome functionality is functioning, we can already package this and get it up and running in the Viva connection. So let's go call up bundle. Bundle, that's the ship. So that's going to prepare our JavaScript files, TypeScript files, compile to be JavaScript and prepare them to get packaged, to get deployed. By the way, there's good comments on the chat related from Carl, serve the JSON in a config folder. There's multiple options as how to do these things. We've got kind of taking the simple route right now, showing this in a partly manual way as well. There are more, let's say, sophisticated ways of doing things as well. Thank you, Carl, on pointing out that one. And then what I'm going to do is then I'm going to do call package package solution and dash ship as well. And this is going to basically create me the solution file. And this is where SharePoint Framework really shines. We're not going to deploy, and Viva Connection extensibility really shines. We're not going to require to be deployed our assets to a website or web application in Azure or AWS or somewhere else. We actually host all of this stuff automatically for you. No costs, no nothing. It's just magically hosted and it works without any additional cost or complexity and operational or maintenance problems with that. So what I'm going to do now is that I'm going to actually open up my file system. We created the package. It's pretty small from font perspective, but let me actually extend that one. There is our SPPKG file, which is actually a zip file. But it's more fancy to say that it's an SPPKG file than a zip file. And it actually contains all of the assets, so JavaScript files, images, all of that stuff inside of it. So now I can send this to with email, or I can sell it for somebody for gajillion or millions, and then I will retire for the rest of my career. Well, not necessarily. That's relatively simple web part, but it's a contained solution. And now I can install this to be available in my tenant. So let's actually do that. So let me go to the app catalog, which, by the way, looks insanely ugly. SharePoint app catalogs is one of those things which are being worked on to have a modernized look and feel. It's pretty outdated, but it's an administrative experience, so it's not a massive deal as such. And I'm going to drag and drop that solution to be available. And there we go. And it's going to ask me that, do you trust the solution? Because it's running in the browser with the permissions of the user. I'm going to install that to be available in a tenant. And there we go. It is now deployed. It's not tenant deployed. No errors. We're looking good. So we can actually start using this in that particular site. That's pretty cool. So we are now ready to go. As we install this in, it actually extracted the package. It's put it automatically to be hosted in a tenant. And now we can actually start using that. Again, without the local host servers or without the local host being running. So now there's no more longer dependencies on the developer box at this point. So now what I'm going to do is that I'm going to go to the home site because I want to have this web part and experience only available within this site, not in other sites. And I'm going to install that to be available as an app. From my organization and apps which I can add, it says SPFX company announcement web part. I'm going to add that one to be available in the site. And that's going to then install that solution to be available from the tenant app catalog to this particular site. And it says that it's been added successfully. We can double check that from a content page, site content page. We can see the solution to be available. And that then means that if you go to the home page, we can start modifying and using that absolutely brilliant $1 million web part. By the way, if somebody wants to buy this for $1 million, we're willing to sell. It's Waldex. Waldex has the rights on that. So I'm going to add the web part in. And if I scroll down now, it's not in the local anymore. It's actually in a bit different experience. It's in the advanced. We didn't set the icon for it. We didn't modify any of the other settings, but we can see the company announcement. If I put it in here, there's our company announcements. Awesome, brilliant looking web part. And I'm going to publish this in the SharePoint Online. And here where it actually gets interesting with the Viva Connections. So now if I go here, if I refresh the experience in the Microsoft Teams, where we have the Viva Connection application running, we can actually see that it is, of course, reflecting all of the changes in here as well. So we can see the web part available here. And that's how we create web parts. That was relatively simple, right? Viva!
Yes, as long as you follow the manual. It is simple.
As long as you follow the manual, yes. To be fair, I think I failed even on following up on some of that stuff. So from a timing perspective, I'm going to take 1 more minute and then Brian can take us home. But basically, you might be familiar with Viva Connection and how do we extend the Viva Connection desktop with the SharePoint framework. And we are heading to a direction where, again, SharePoint framework is going to be renamed. We talk about Viva Connection and Viva more from a branding perspective, but underlying technology is still TypeScript, web stack development, all of that stuff. And the web part is one way of extending Viva Connection on top of the adaptive card and application customizers. So we're going to do the application customizers then next week. And I think that's pretty much it for us today. So Brian, you can take us home and close the call.
Excellent. Let me present back our deck and we'll wrap things up here today. Thank you, Vesa. Thank you, Waldeck, for some awesome information related to Viva Connections. All right. So wrapping up today's Microsoft 365 Platform Community Call. If you are interested in any other community calls that are out there, we do have a couple of ones related to adaptive cards, to Identity, to Office, Power Apps, and so forth. You can find the links on the page on here, or you can go to our one-stop shop, once again, aka.ms/m365pnp. And as always, these calls are going to be recorded. You can find them on our Microsoft 365 Community PNP YouTube channel, aka.ms/m365pnp/videos. We'll have that available in a short frame. Please do follow along with us on our various Twitter handles. You can find us at Microsoft 365 Dev or at M365PNP. Our next session will be next week, November 23rd, at our normal time, 8 a.m. Pacific, UTC-8. So thank you so much for joining in today. Great crowd, great interactions. Really love all the commentary, questions, and so forth. Look forward to seeing you next week, and have a great day. Thank you.
Thanks, everybody. Great job, Loki, as well.
Thank you. Really bye-bye.